Buongiorno, siamo a...
Good afternoon. We're here at this pivotal meeting within this meeting in Rimini. It's the most important political meeting. It's titled Europe of the Regions. We have José Manuel Durão Barroso, the President of the European Commission.
Roberto
Formigoni, President of the Lombardy region.
Mauro.
And Mauro from the Popolo della Libertà group at the European Parliament. He is the head of the group. You know, the theme of this meeting is particularly relevant. Europe to us is an important reference point. Even before the reform of the European Union, since Formigoni went to the European Parliament, and then Mauro with his vice presidency. Well, all this has contributed to having us look upon Europe as the Europe of peoples, something which corresponds to our Christianity, a sort of historical heritage which became real, up-to-date, and very much in line with our need, with our desire to avoid the nationalism which had caused wars in the past. To us, Europe means going back to this ideal of universality and peace amongst peoples, and this certainly encompasses both the European Union and the rest of the world. Now let me go back to an up-to-date issue. I was reading this morning that the Commission's spring survey was disseminated. 49% of the European people think that being part of the European Union is something good for their countries, according to this survey. In the past, this percentage was 58%, much higher than that. The idea is, on the other hand, that there is growing European action. You know, people thought that European action had to take place, and this was true for 21% of people in the past. Well, now it's 26%. So there's an increasing desire for a European action in Europe. Sometimes there seems to be incomplete perception of Europe going in this direction. So the first question I'm asking our three guests is the following. Then they will answer in full speeches. What is the ideal dimension of Europe? In which direction do we intend to go? Because, you know, United States of Europe, European Union, a mere economic union, a federalist pact. What is it going to be in the future? This question about the future is not a utopian question. It is a question that many people ask themselves within the European borders. Second question, the Europe of the regions. Reading the Lisbon Treaty, you can appreciate that it has redefined the European Union. There's political responsibility on the part of the regions. This is something which is particularly dear to us. In the idea of federalist states which do not humiliate the localities, the local autonomies. President Formigoni in the Lombardy region has shown that one can obtain results in a region of the European Union which are even better than the state results. One can be close to the citizens. Good governance is achievable. The relationship between the political world and the social entities may be of great satisfaction. On the other hand, there could be many small nations, the creation of many small separate nations not united. Europe of regions, relationship among states, all these are topical issues. Think of federalism. In countries like Italy, Spain or the UK, we can't think that this is something which falls out of the definition of Europe. Third aspect, subsidiarity. Over the last years, we have fought for the relationship with the state to be based on subsidiarity. Also, thanks to what is enshrined in the Constitution, in political actions, social realities have to be kept into account. If political subsidiarity moves from Rome to Madrid or Brussels, is there the possibility of establishing a dialogue with this big reality made up by 27 countries? Can we build Europe, a Europe which has to do with small movements, cooperatives, small enterprises? These are questions. The questions I'm addressing our three guests. First of all, the floor to Mauro.
Buonasera a tutti.
Good evening, everybody. Professor Vittadini's introduction was a significant one. President Formigoni and President Barroso will hold wonderful speeches. Mine is going to be a short preamble, perhaps the only European preamble where Christian roots will be made reference to. It is not by chance that I would like to start from the testimony that I gave that was given in this room at the beginning of the meeting by the President of Ireland. Europe is useful, indeed so, because, we tend to lose sight of our past times, and we have forgotten that up to some years ago, people would shoot at each other in Ireland. People would kill each other. The Irish president reminded us of the fact that it was thanks to the European mediation that the UK and Ireland could help those that were involved in the Northern Irish negotiations to ensure peace. There's another face of the coin, though. Europe was not able to intervene promptly 15 years ago, for example, in the Balkans. There, massacres took place, terrible ones. And when Europe started putting a remedy to this, a new path of peace and security started for a broad area of the Balkans. The issue, therefore, is not to be in favor of a European-oriented rhetoric, thinking that that all good comes from the European institutions. But it's also important not to banalize, not to trivialize the past. It was a process of development which not only in the first 50 years, but also in the last 10 years, has turned us into people who can calmly look at the present time. Maybe you think this is a contradiction in a period of crisis, but please don't forget that 5 years ago, overnight, more than 100 million people became European. It was when we enlarged the Union. Maybe you remember that some years ago, squares were full of Polish citizens. Now we don't see them anymore because the mechanism of European integration has allowed them to have a present and future time full of dignity in their homeland. At this point, a curious reaction triggers off. Every day in my country, I hear people say everything is going smoothly. It is the merit of this government, the past government, the future government, and if there's a trouble, it's always Europe's fault, not the national government's fault. I think we can reasonably say that nationalism has not died out, and really the government leaders are skilled and know what is at stake. Has nationalism really disappeared? I don't think so. Nationalism sort of breaks the completion of a united Europe and the best of our projects. It's like Penelope's cloth. So today I have invited Penelope here. This issue is equally important, and back to a quotation of Churchill's, there is a remedy which in a few years' time would make the whole of Europe happy and free. It is all about reconstructing the family of European peoples, He's not mentioning states. So European nations, peoples. We can endow Europe with a structure which makes it possible for it to live in peace and freedom, some kind of United States of Europe. To what extent is the European Union close to United States of Europe? I'm speaking with the freedom of an MP member, of an MP, but there are families that would like, for example, to confuse the European Union with the European Union of Soviet republics. So really we don't have to forget about the subsidiarity and the good of people. In fact, if there was European competence not on all human knowledge, as some people would like it to be, but on some essential issues, then I think we would all see great benefits in this, and we would ask ourselves in a determined way what states are for. We have for a long time said we want a European foreign policy. To what extent is this useful? Think, for example, of the great tragic division on Iraq. Think of the equally tragic divisions on the issue of the Balkans. If we had a European foreign policy, and if, as many governments like ours argue, there was a common European migration policy, at that point, what would be the meaning of saying that a state controls its borders? This is a prerequisite of being a state. Therefore, these issues are not simple. They cannot be trivialized. All these issues are linked to our lives. Malta is really very small. But not only Malta, also Italy, which has a longer shoreline, cannot have the keys to solve the migration problems. But we have to be clear about this. If 5 years ago we have taken in 100 million people from the east of Europe, don't we have the same responsibilities towards the south, supporting the states which represent the frontiers of Europe to the south? This is the big question, because unless we understand where Europe should commit itself strategically, we would make Europe less attractive and our future less interesting. We easily criticized Germany because they were hesitant in supporting Greece during the crisis. But someone should explain a German worker, for example, who retires at the age of 67 with 52% of the latest wage, why he should have shown solidarity to a Greek person who retires at the age of 55 with 99% of the latest wage. Harmonizing doesn't mean that we standardize everything. Harmonizing means that we compete together trying to find the best solution to our problems. What are the regions there for? In the Europeistic rhetoric, there was also mention to this, and we seem to be forgetting about the regions. It would be interesting to go back to this. I hear a lot of trivial things about this. An example, in the 27 countries of the European Union, we have just above 70 million people aged below 25. Turkey has 70 million inhabitants, Morocco 80 million. They account for more than half of the young population of the whole Union. If you consider the figures of all the states, you see that the population indices, which cause fierce competition between France, Italy, Spain and Sweden. Italy and Spain have very low birth rates. Now, if we re-examine all these figures on the basis of regional figures, then you see that the Catalan indices or the Lombardy region indices are not the same as those of Spain or Italy, respectively. So talking in abstract terms without really understanding which tools have to be made available to the population to achieve the right goals would really take us adrift. We need to consider that all that we're talking about is available to pursue an even greater goal, which is a simple one. The institutions have to be considered at the service of our lives, not as the masters of our lives. The institutions are the guarantors of all the attempts that we as citizens make in order to meet our needs. They're not the masters of our lives. They have to be able to watch what is happening in our society and support it. The Europe of peoples and regions is a Europe which is kept together by a certain glue, and it may solve a significant amount of our problems. I previously said that you would be listening to a preamble with reference to the Christian roots of Europe. What does this have to do with the Europe of regions? During the press conference today, talking about displaying religious symbols in public places, I said that false news was conveyed in Italy by all the media. Europe against the crucifix. The court that issued that sentence is not an institution of the United Europe, and the institution headed by President Barroso says, and I quote, the national laws on the religious symbols in public places fall within the domestic legal system. They are a national competence, after all. It may seem trivial, but, we have gathered under a motto, united in diversity, which is very important. In France, you have a model of state laity, but it can coexist with countries like Spain and Italy, where there is a strong Christian tradition, and also countries where this religion is part of the state, because, for example, in the UK, the head of state is also the head of the church. Please don't forget a small detail. Let's try and reason in absurd terms on the theme of Europe. If that sentence was really confirmed, now if we took away the religious symbol from all classrooms in Italy, and if this would have a binding value for all the European countries and also those of the Council of Europe, if we really were to be consistent and coherent, then what should we do with the flag of Finland, which has a nice blue cross on a white field? And what about the Swedish flag? And what should we do with the flag of Slovakia, with the flag of Greece, or the flag of Malta? What should we do with the lay Union Jack, which has two crosses, not to mention the Norwegian flag, which is not yet part of Europe, Georgia, Scotland, to go back to the theme of subsidiarity and federalism, Switzerland. And, you know, since a major country from the Euro-Mediterranean area, Turkey, has applied for becoming a member, who's going to tell them that they have to remove the crescent from their flag?
Quindi, quando ci sembra...
So, when we think that the European institutions are mountains giving birth to small mice, if we think that there are huge conclaves which make ineffective decisions, be careful, because one by one each of these decisions is part of the pathway which has ensured 60 years of peaceful development, unprecedented peaceful development. But we're not happy with this. We'd want more, and to want more, we really want to pursue this pathway with our faces. Thank you.
L'elemento da cui dobbiamo partire è quello che...
I think the basic element is what Giorgio Vittadini was mentioning at the beginning, when he gave us dramatic, at least worrying figures about the drop in the confidence shown by the European citizens in Europe. And he was mentioning that today less than half of the European citizens have a positive attitude of hope in European institutions, while years ago we had percentages of 60, even before that 70 or 80%. The difference between Mauro and me is the following. You know, I was vice president of the European Parliament in the years of great expectations and hopes, and Mauro had to come to terms with the disappointments. But Mauro has said that we have not lost hope, and faced with the difficulties, we indeed react with what Mauro has specified. Thank you, therefore. As I was saying, the difficulty we have to tackle is that of a European people running the risk of not believing enough or not believing at all in a Europe which is one of the last possibilities available in our hands. Because if we compare the indices of productivity in Italy and the rest of Europe, we realize that the history runs the risk of setting our products, our countries aside. The GDP of China exceeded that of Japan, for example, with China ranking second in the European economy and is about to overcome the United States, is a clear sign of the fact that the world economic growth is going through other latitudes and longitudes. It's not just about the US and Europe and everything which is between them. So on the one hand, we have to strengthen hope in Europe and also find a new starting point to recreate this hope, this confidence, so that Europe is back to being a driving force for our overall progress. Where should we start from? Europe. Europe, more than anything else, needs to start from its origins, roots, and very foundations. The vision of Europe of the founding fathers is still a valid vision. Schuman, Adenauer, De Gasperi really summarized everything in the word people, which is the cultural root of subsidiarity that we so often quote, not because it's a fancy of ours, but because of realistic realization of reality. From this point of view, Europe really has everything in order, because the founding documents of Europe are the very first talking about subsidiarity. If you take the Maastricht Treaty, for example, in its preamble you see the additional and supplementary role of public intervention. Jacques Delors refers to this. In 1991, presenting that treaty, said subsidiarity is not only the limitation of the intervention of a higher authority on an individual, but it's the obligation on the part of that authority to provide the means by which people and communities can achieve their goals. So he was referring to vertical and also horizontal subsidiarity. Mention to subsidiarity is made in the Lisbon Treaty in more recent years. The final ratification occurred in 2009. Now, and I'm addressing President Barroso, thanking him also on my part for coming here and also for accepting to talk about these issues with us. I think, President Barroso, that the main road is for Europe to have the ability to recover this dimension, that is subsidiarity. It is a dimension which the meeting in Rimini calls the heart, that nature that pushes us to desire great things. Subsidiarity is indeed the result of this positive anthropology of those that are confident in the person and in social creativity. So, President Barroso, Europe was basic to recognize subsidiarity in its treaties. Now, Europe must launch a concrete movement of institutions and people who translate subsidiarity fully into reality. We know that this project comes across obstacles, and since we are used to be honest and frank, it's often national states which reduce the meaning of subsidiarity. They talk about subsidiarity in defensive ways. They use the word subsidiarity against the Commission itself to say, Mr. Barroso, don't talk about this, don't enter our business. If Europe has its religious and humanistic dimension, it must rely on this. So we actually win and overcome the resistances of nation states and rather cooperate with the Commission directly, cooperation between the regions and the Commission directly to avoid the opposition of the nation states. The presence of President Barroso here is useful to stimulate the institutions to really implement subsidiarity. All this means that the individual must have a central role, religious freedom to a true freedom to choose at the economic level, but also at other levels, at the level of healthcare, the welfare system, education, and also, dear President Barroso, another dimension should be recovered, which is part of the European identity. It's the family dimension. I know that also concerning the family, there are different positions within the Union, but, you know, we're part of that great family of European people's parties. The family to us is a man and a woman who are together to form a family and have children and educate them. For this purpose, we need that the European institutions, the Commission, support our policies. Dear friends of the Rimini meeting, last year, when closing the meeting, I announced that the Lombardy region was about to make an important choice. We were in the early months of the economic downturn. We had just come to an agreement on social dampeners with the state. In those days, 1 year ago, I announced that the Lombardy region committed itself to introducing into the social dampeners, into all the forms of aid to workers that were out of their job temporarily, an economic subsidy, a grant, which was linked to the family quotient. We wanted to introduce this concept of family quotient into the social dampeners, and I'm happy to inform you that we have respected this commitment, and to us the social dampeners are linked to the family quotient.
Ma in queste politiche, Presidente Barroso, una volta di più,
but in these policies, President Barroso, we increasingly need the help of the Commission, because many funds that we use, including those for the social dampeners that we're using in Italy, well, many of these funds are of European origin. So the norms and regulations which control the granting of these funds have to make reference to this, so as to make it easier for the actions and states that want to implement these actions to do so in an easy way. Subsidiarity and role of regions. Well, this again is a manifold topic. The debate on the role of regions in Europe has been speeding up around the theme of multi-level governance of the European institutions. Reflections were made on devolution, federalism, progressive change in the framework of balances. In Europe, we have increasingly acknowledged the role that the strongest regional governments can play in this direction. In Europe, the most important regions have found a major and significant counterpart in the Commission, a counterpart which, or an interlocutor which can really acknowledge the weight and role of the regions. This is also what is happening throughout the world. The role of the regions is not an invention of an expert in theoretical issues. Regions are given important tasks elsewhere in the world too. The aggressive development of China started decades ago when the Chinese Communist government decided to bet on the special economic areas that Deng Xiaoping wanted. China would not be that giant in the economic world unless it had given value to the Shanghai, Shenzhen and Beijing areas. Today we have to recognize that regions are to play an extraordinarily important role, really a pivotal role. But once again, let me reiterate that this role, this task, has to be institutionally acknowledged at European level. Otherwise, there will continuously be a difficulty. We will have to every time fiercely fight for the recognition of what we are doing, for our actions. For example, I believe that the pivotal role of the regions in the field of international relations should be recognized. And also the ability to establish international alliances and network with other systems to exchange views and develop virtuous partnerships is really a very important ability. Also, production areas are less linked to certain specific territories at the present time. They need mobility of both information and people to reduce distances between people and cultures. The world of research also, thanks to the power of the media, can be present everywhere in the world and be increasingly integrated. I think the networking ability is a discriminating factor between mobility and development. Usually these networks are material networks through which you exchange information, knowledge, goods and people. Let me briefly mention that the Lombardy region experience proved to be extraordinarily positive. It was supported by so many regions in Europe and the rest of the world. For example, in Europe we have the 4 drivers of the Club of the Regions that President Barroso knows all too well. And also, let me mention another world experience of ours where we would like the Commission to play a role. Last December, we gathered in Milan the first World Region Forum. It's the forum of the 15 most dynamic regions in the world. And by dynamic, I don't only mean dynamic from the economic standpoint, but also from the standpoint of education. For example, Bayern, Baden-Württemberg, Madrid, St. Petersburg, California, Illinois, Quebec, New Orleans, Sao Paulo, Cauden, South Africa, Shanghai, Singapore, and New South Wales, Australia, all attended this meeting. This is why, after 2 decades, we can continue talking about a Europe of regions. The regions have increased, have grown in the last few years, and they have shown they have given great opportunities of growth and development to their citizens, both for the regions and for themselves. Let me close with 2 proposals, 2 suggestions that I'm going to put forward to my friend, President Barroso, as a politician rather than as an institutional authority. To be accepted, these proposals need a brave politician and not so much attention to regulations as the one paid by a man of the institutions. So I'd like to address my friend José Manuel from the family of the People's Parties in Europe. I'd like him to throw his heart beyond the obstacle. I would like him to be our ally and our ally on 2 basic issues. First of all, an important issue which is at stake in Italy at the present time, federalism and tax federalism. We intend to have a tax revenue system which is not managed centrally, but in the different regions, in the different areas. This is not only an Italian need, but a Europe-wide need. Think of what this would mean in terms of development. The most advanced regions could develop networks of excellence, and starting from these networks of excellence, they could help also the regions that need social cohesion and subsidiarity. José Manuel, please help us build this Europe-wide federalism. My second proposal is one that I would like to introduce with a curious observation, something that we discovered some time ago. It led us to reflect. The observation is the following. If you Google the word subsidiarity, what do you see? At least in Microsoft Word, the word subsidiarity is not accepted at all. The word, if you write in Microsoft Word, the spell check says that it's a mistake, that you have made a mistake in writing a few letters. Yet the word subsidiarity, which is at the foundation of the European institutions, is not present in well over 85 dictionaries throughout the world. So we who believe in subsidiarity are still pioneers. We have to have the same innovation ability that pioneers have, because subsidiarity is needed by the entire world. President Barroso, or rather José Manuel, my proposal is that your Commission, or you personally, set up a European observatory on subsidiarity, vertical subsidiarity, but above all horizontal subsidiarity, because under your guidance as a president with members coming from the states and the regions, one can help survey and also enhance this pathway of subsidiarity in our countries and regions. Our society deeply needs this. Our Europe deeply needs this. Let's bravely go back to a Europe of peoples and regions. Let's build together this pathway of subsidiarity for an overall growth of our peoples. Thank you, José Manuel.
Signore e signori, prima di tutto vorrei ringraziare la professoressa Emilia Guarnieri.
Ladies and gentlemen, first of all, thank you very much to Emilia Guarnieri for having invited me to take part in this Rimini meeting for the friendship between peoples. Also, I would like to thank my friend Mauro, who did not rest until he convinced me to finally come to Rimini this year, and he got it. I am really very grateful to him, I must say. Just by looking at this impressive number of people coming here together, I feel deeply honored and touched. It is a particular pleasure for me to attend the Rimini meeting because this important and ever more forceful initiative is led by you, by the civil society, by hundreds and thousands of volunteers who have made of Rimini what it is today, the world's biggest summer festival of encounters in the world. I strongly welcome your fantastic effort, your commitment, your initiatives and energy that you represent. You represent an important development of our democracies where civil society movements are becoming a cultural and social force of ever greater significance in Europe today. I'd like to return to this point later. Now, matters of critical importance for Europe and for the world are being discussed here, with contributions by international speakers on the most diverse of topics. In this warm, festive and artistic atmosphere, people of different cultures and faiths are brought together to learn from each other. What is particularly remarkable is the huge number of young people who make a point of coming to the Rimini meeting. This is a very encouraging sign of their moral seriousness and of their willingness to be engaged. Society as a whole can only benefit from this enthusiasm.
I think you can understand. I promise that next time I will try to speak a longer speech in Italian than this time. The theme chosen this year, that nature which pushes us to desire great things is a heart, reminds me of the creation of our common Europe. Its founding fathers, great men like Robert Schuman, Jean Monnet, Konrad Adenauer, Alcide de Gasperi, after the Second World War, ignored the rational response of distrust and suspicion of the other, and instead listened to their hearts. And in their hearts they realized that the cycle of hatred and violence had to be broken. What they desired was not just a great thing, it was an astonishing and audacious thing, unique in world history. The ever closer union they launched between the peoples of Europe has demonstrated for over half a century that peace and cooperation is possible even among historic enemies. And increasingly, closer links are now emerging, not only between Europeans, but also between us and the peoples of other regions of the world. There is great interest out there in our pioneering system of supranational cooperation based on shared values and objectives. There is great hope that it can serve as an example for peace and regional integration in other parts of the world. The peace that we won through the process of European integration is much more than just peaceful coexistence. It is built on the rule of law and the principles of subsidiarity, freedom, justice and democracy. Without ignoring the current difficulties, and there are serious difficulties in the Europe of today, Europe is enjoying the fairest political, economic and social order it has ever known. War in our European Union really has become not just unthinkable, but materially impossible. Just what the founding fathers hoped for with all their hearts, and we all aim at to make this achievement infinite. For many young Europeans here today who were born into peaceful democracies, this is taken for granted. Living in peace, democracy and freedom is part of the natural order of things. As much as traveling across borders, studying abroad, or making friends over the internet, it is a part of your culture and your everyday life. But you all know it was not always like this. Only until a few years ago, Europeans still had to fight for freedom and democracy in Greece, Portugal and Spain in the 70s, in Central and Eastern Europe in the late 80s and early 90s, and even war was possible on the other side of the Adriatic Sea in former Yugoslavia, only a few kilometers away from Rimini, just 15 years ago. And as Mauro has just reminded us, following the speech of the President of Ireland, very recently there was still conflicts in our European Union, and the European Union has helped to solve the historic conflict of Ireland. Thus, we Europeans fought for the better, fought for change, and we brought it about. But precisely because the battle for peace, freedom, and democracy is never won forever, we need the European Union. Peace between the peoples of Europe has been and will always remain the principal foundation of the common European project. Having said this, Europe today is facing new and different challenges. Europe is facing a crisis which is not just an economic or a financial crisis. It is also a crisis of values. Emerging from this crisis requires us to put human dignity at the heart of our endeavors. The lesson to be learned is that neither the market nor the state alone can provide the answers to today's challenges. We need the people. We need you. We need all the forces of society with all their energy, creativity and talent. The economic and financial crisis, the worst in 80 years, has rocked Europe and indeed the whole world. It has destroyed millions of jobs and has put millions of people at the risk of poverty and social exclusion. Thus, our first and most pressing concern today is to overcome this crisis. And to do this successfully, Europeans have to act together, and even more than in the past. The crisis has demonstrated how interdependent Europe's economies are. It shows how a crisis in one member state can affect us all, not only in the euro area, but in the entire European Union and in global markets. The crisis is a sharp wake-up call to us Europeans. If in this globalized world we want to preserve our European values, our social market economy, our model of freedom and solidarity, then European integration has to move on. Then every member state and region has to understand that it is a part of a political and economic union and should act accordingly. Then the European institutions have to play their full role in Europe and globally. Our reactions to the crisis were forceful and clear, but this is only the start. To fully tackle the crisis, we are acting along 5 main lines. We need fiscal consolidation and sound public finances. We need to improve the economic governance in the European Union. We need to invest in competitiveness and smart, sustainable and inclusive growth through our Europe 2020 strategy. We need to build stable and responsible financial service markets. And on the global level, we must continue to press for strong and clear commitments in the G8 and the G20 forum. First, consolidation. The high levels of sovereign debt in the European Union must be seen in context. In the late 2008, at the beginning of this crisis, Europe had to move quickly to rescue its banks and to inject massive fiscal stimuli into its economies. But these measures had to be limited in time. In the long run, there can be no sustainable growth without sound public finances. We cannot keep spending money we have not got and expect our young people to pay the bill later. Consolidation is the precondition to restore confidence of consumers and investors and to lay the basis for new sustainable growth. Second, on economic governance, we need to first and foremost strengthen the Stability and Growth Pact, as the Commission has set out in its proposals of June. We need a more comprehensive surveillance system that also tackles macroeconomic imbalances and competitiveness problems in the Member States. We will bring national reform programs and national fiscal planning into line. And we will have a more intelligent, more robust, more automatic set of incentives and sanctions for Member States to respect the rules of the Stability and Growth Pact. Consolidation and better economic governance serve one purpose: to create growth and employment. Growth is the key. But this is not enough, because austerity programs will not create new jobs. Alone, they will not do it. I do not agree with those who say that fiscal consolidation will damage growth. There is no contradiction between greater fiscal discipline and economic growth as long as this is supported by the necessary structural reforms and the objective is growth. The roadmap for this policy, for a true transformation agenda, is our Europe 2020 strategy. This is the European Union's growth strategy for the future, starting today. A program that focuses structural reforms on 3 key objectives: smart growth, sustainable growth, and inclusive growth. By smart growth, we mean a growth that fosters innovation, investing in young people, investing in a digital Europe. Sustainable growth, because we must shift away from traditional resources, we must decarbonize energy and transport and be more energy efficient. Our 2020 goals for energy and climate will save us 60 billion euros, increase security of supply, and bring at least 3 million green new jobs by 2020. And inclusive growth, this means safeguard Europe's social model. The efforts cannot be made on the backs of the poorest of our society. We are setting out a new agenda for skills and jobs, increase investment in lifelong learning, and intensify our fight against poverty and social exclusion. Under Europe 2020, the European Union has committed itself to achieve concrete and ambiguous targets by 2020 for employment, research and development and innovation, climate change and energy, education and social inclusion. Real growth will come from addressing the roots of a lack of competitiveness. Real growth will come from targeting public spending in a sound budgetary framework on these areas that are strategic for future growth. Real growth will come from making better use of our internal market, and I'm particularly grateful for the important report prepared by former Commissioner Mario Monti on ways to complete and consolidate the single market. I also mentioned financial markets and the global level. We need sound and strong financial services markets. But these services have also to be at the service of the real economy, at the service of the citizens, and not the other way around. It is only fair that financial markets participate in the very painful efforts to overcome the crisis and to pay their share. The crisis, after all, started in the financial sector. Taxpayers have already paid a high price to bail out banks in Europe. To make sure this will not happen again, our economies need better supervision and better regulation in Europe and globally. We are in the Commission working hard to ensure that new and much better rules are in place by 2011 or shortly thereafter, on stricter financial supervision, on hedge funds and private equity, on capital requirements, on derivatives and short selling, on credit rating agencies, on deposit and investor protection. This is not a vendetta against financial institutions. We want open markets and competition, but in a fair, responsible and transparent way. I was talking about the crisis of values in the beginning. We have a duty to bring ethical behavior back into financial markets. We therefore need fundamental regulation to avoid new bubbles. At international level, the G20 proved to be the premier forum for global economic cooperation. Clearly, the European Union is in the lead when it comes to pushing ahead with financial sector reform, fiscal consolidation, and sustainable economic growth. Ladies and gentlemen, dear friends, I said it before, for our efforts, and notably for the Europe 2020 strategy to succeed, we need the full and active participation of all sectors, all actors concerned, social partners, civil society, local and regional authorities all have their indispensable role to play. Europe's regions are at the very heart of all this effort, be it for creating new and sustainable jobs, investing in new technologies, fighting climate change, using structural funds for sound regional and urban planning, for infrastructure development, for ensuring high levels of education for our citizens, or for social inclusion and helping the poorest in our societies. This is why the European cohesion policy helps our regions invest in the Europe 2020 strategy goals. Over the last 3 years, 93 billion euros, it is around 27% of European Union funding, has been allocated to projects for investment in jobs and growth in Europe. Taking account of the economic crisis, an extra 6 billion euros has been made available in advance so that Europe's regions can launch projects even when public funds are restricted. Regional policy interventions have been closely integrated with the national recovery plans in many countries, where European structural funds have a substantial macroeconomic impact. These plans also exist at regional level, for example in Lombardy. Our goal is clearly to enable regions to react rapidly and effectively to the new situation caused by the current crisis. One good illustration of the important role regions can play in building a better Europe for future generations is the Covenant of Mayors. Rimini is just one of 1,800 towns and cities that have signed up to this covenant. In doing so, they have, just to give you an example, committed themselves to go beyond objectives of the European Union's energy policy in terms of reducing CO2 emissions. As a result, local governments have become leading actors in implementing sustainable energy policies. Through the combined efforts of the Covenant of Mayors signatories, an estimated 132 million tons of CO2 emissions can be saved every year. That is the equivalent of 78 million fewer cars on Europe's roads, or the total annual emissions of 22 coal-fired power plants. I would very much like to see local and regional authorities extend innovative partnerships like the Covenant of Mayors to other policy areas. This would help Europe to translate its ambitions into reality while taking account of the immense diversity our continent enjoys and the differing situations in the ground. Ladies and gentlemen, dear friends, this for me is subsidiarity in action. And then I want to take the friendly challenge made by Professor Formigoni, President Formigoni. I mean, President of Lombardia, Professor in subsidiarity. And we should not forget that while many today assume that subsidiarity is just another piece of Euro jargon, that is probably why Microsoft has not accepted yet the word subsidiarity, because they believe it's just European. It has in fact been a key feature of Catholic social teaching for more than 100 years. When reflecting on what subsidiarity means in practice, it is worth returning to the source. The Catholic Church defines it as a community of a higher order helping, not hindering, a community of a lower order. In this way, people and organizations closest to people can properly contribute to the common good. This approach to subsidiarity is at the heart of how the European Union and its institutions function. It is now firmly enshrined in the Lisbon Treaty, which makes clearer than ever before that the voices of all parts of society must be heard when the Union is deciding how to deal with the challenges we face. National parliaments have been given an enhanced role, and so too as the body which represents our regions and localities, the Committee of Regions. Europe, that magnificent construction that has secured peace, prosperity and stability for generations of Europeans, is not just Brussels. Europe is Rimini as well. That is why I think it is very important, this idea of a common responsibility for Europe. that Mauro has also highlighted. We in the European institutions, be it in the European Commission or in the European Parliament, we have to do our part of the job. But the leaders at national level and regional level, they are also European leaders. We cannot only put the responsibility in Brussels or Strasbourg. We need to assume this European project, this European responsibility at all levels of our society. And this is the way we have to understand subsidiarity. Not in a restricted way, but on the contrary, as a way of a responsible behavior towards our common good. And the common good in Europe, be it in Italy or in Germany or in Greece or in Portugal, can only be found with a stronger European Union that is able to protect and defend the interests of the Europeans in the world. But Europe is not and cannot be an imposition from the top down. It must be built and strengthened from the bottom up, by our regions, by our cities, by each one of you. So let me end this speech by encouraging all of you to seize the opportunities provided by previous generations and make your own contribution to Europe. Let your experience here in Rimini inspire you to build strong communities, strong regions. Then, and only then, can we say with confidence that we are building a strong Europe as well. An open Europe, a prosperous Europe, a Europe of opportunity for all, a Europe that is proud of its heritage and its values, a Europe that is able to defend its values in the world. Vi ringrazio sentitamente per la vostra attenzione. Grazie molto.
C'è stata molta economia con...
I've seen in the papers that there has been a lot of economic discussion during this meeting. We're obviously very much interested in the well-being of our people. We have organized a special exhibition on the recent crisis. We had invited outstanding speakers, but as we've heard today, there's also been great politics, and that nature which pushes us to desire great things is the heart. That is to say that we are experiencing the present day as processes that are much bigger than our own life. As we have heard today, we are all part of a long history. A history which is maybe longer and bigger than the centuries experienced by Europe. Those of you who know about history know that this topic of the European Union, or unity of Europe and cooperation between peoples, is closely related with the Catholic faith, Christian faith. The Church in Europe, ever since the beginning of times after the fall of the Roman Empire, has always attempted to reconstruct a political union based on peace, development and prosperity. So the meeting of this afternoon, as clearly indicated by Barroso, implies that we want to be part of this process. I mean, we cannot simply live our own life. We cannot simply think about ourselves. We have to feel that this is an important contribution to rebuild this unity of Europe. And this unity, as clearly pointed out by Mauro, is a prerequisite for the other topic which has been central during this meeting, freedom of religion. As a possibility that is given to each and everyone of living our own faith with an impact on the political, economic and social life. And without this unit, it is not possible to do this. Why? Now, next year, there will be the meeting dedicated to the 150th anniversary of the unity of Italy. Now, and this is very significant, but this could actually be used against the freedom of religion, against the freedom of the people, and against faith. I mean, if nationalism prevails, nationalism will lead to wars and humiliated local authorities, mentioned by Formigoni. I mean, we can mention the unity of Italy with rhetoric to reassert something which humiliated local authorities, subsidiarity from the bottom, and the unity of the Italian peoples. Now, talking about political unity of Europe, we intend to, we want to defend the desires of the I of each and every one of us. Barroso mentioned fundamental things for Europe, as Barroso provided us with guarantees that how important it is that Europe is working for the common good, but we want to be connected to the other people. If we still believe in the unity of Italy, then we have to consider this not as a destination, not as the final point. We want a greater unity, European Union. Otherwise, this unity could well humiliate the very existence of local authorities. So you obviously understand that this is a great political commitment. I mean, there has been very little politics at meeting these days. I mean, that kind of policy that we dislike, the gossip and the superficial politics. We like more the far-reaching politics, the positive political contribution. I mean, the Rimini meeting was set up for the friendship between peoples, and a group of families from Rimini thought that their own experience could contribute to a better world of cooperation. And today we had yet another piece of evidence of this. Really hope that next year this will continue in the same meeting. We have here outstanding guests as we have had today. Thank you very much.